Welcome back. In the previous episode, we completed the work on a shooting turret. In this episode, we will create elevators that move vertically or horizontally between 2 points. Alright, let's get going. Drag the elevator sprite to the scene. We will define the elevator's area of movement with 2 empty game objects which have a trigger collider. When the elevator hits one of them, it will stay still for a few seconds and then start to move to the opposite direction. So, let's create an empty game object. Reset its position on the Z-axis and rename it as Elevator Start. Then, attach a box collider component to it and set it as trigger. For the size, change the Y-axis to 0.25. Next, we need to give it a tag. Create a new tag and name it as Elevator Trigger. And then, move the empty game object under the elevator. Next step is to duplicate it and move it higher. Do that and rename the copy as Elevator End. We're almost done with setting up the system. We need to create 2 empty game objects more. One will be the parent of all of these elevator objects, so that we can move the whole system easily at once, and the other one will have the script in it. So, create an empty game object again, and name it as Elevator System. Reset its position on Z. Move it to the center of the wooden platform. Then, move all of the elevator objects inside of it in the hierarchy. When that's done, reset the children's X position. Before we create the next empty game object, select the elevator and rename it as Elevator GFX. Then give it a box collider and adjust the size. Lastly, change the layer to ground. Finally, create the empty game object and name it as Elevator. Make it a child of the elevator system and reset its position. Then, drag the elevator GFX inside of the elevator game object. Now the structure of the whole system should look like this. Elevator system as main parent, and then the triggers and elevator as its children, and finally elevator GFX as elevator's child. Before jumping to code, we need to set up the elevator game object. The components it needs are the box collider and rigid body. Go ahead and add them. Let's set up the collider first. Activate the isTrigger option and change the size of the collider so that it covers the elevator roughly. Then move the collider just above the wooden platform. This will act as a trigger that sends the player script a message that now we are on an elevator. Next, change the rigid body type to kinematic, as we don't want that the elevator falls down due to gravity. The final thing to do is to give this game object a new tag. Create a tag called Elevator and assign it to the game object. Now we can start coding. Create a new script called Elevator and attach it to this elevator game object. Then drag the whole elevator system to the prefabs folder. When you're done, open the elevator script. To begin with, we will create few variables. First one will define the speed of the elevator. Write public float speed equals to 2f. The second one we will use to define whether the elevator moves vertically or horizontally. Write public bool is horizontal. Third one will tell us has the elevator hit the trigger yet. Write public bool hit trigger. Fourth one will tell us the moving direction. Write public bool is moving up. And the last one will store the rigid body. Write private rigid body 2D RB. Then in start function, write RB equals the get component rigid body 2D. Next, change the update function into fixed update. Here we need to define the movement for vertical and horizontal direction. Let's start with the vertical movement. Write if exclamation mark is horizontal. Then, inside of this if statement, we need two more if statements. One is for moving up and the other for moving down. We will deal with moving up first. The elevator should move up when its moving up boolean is true and heat trigger is not. So, write if is moving up 2 ampersands exclamation mark hit trigger. Then inside of the if statement, write rb.velocity equals to vector 2 dot up multiplied by speed. Next in line is moving down. It should happen when both is moving up and heat trigger are false. Write if exclamation mark is moving up 2 ampersands exclamation mark heat trigger. Then inside of the curly brackets, write rb.velocity equals to vector 2 dot down multiplied by speed. Nice! Vertical movement is now done. The horizontal is quite similar. Copy the whole is horizontal if statement and paste it under. We just need to make few adjustments. Remove the exclamation mark which is in front of is horizontal. And then change the direction of both vector 2's in the following way. Replace up with right and down with left. Now the horizontal movement is done too. Next, we will create a custom function that will turn the direction of the elevator. You are free to name it as you want, but I will use the name turn. Write void turn, parentheses, and curly brackets. What do we need to write inside of this function? When we take a look at the conditions on the if statements above, we see that is moving up needs to be inverted and also heat trigger needs to be false. To invert a boolean, we can just write is moving up equals to exclamation mark is moving up. When turn function is called, this boolean is always changed to the opposite of the current value. Then, under it, write heat trigger equals to false. Currently, this function is never called. In which kind of situation it should be called? The direction of the elevator should be changed when it hits the trigger area. So we will use onTriggerEnter function for that. At the same time, we need to stop the elevator and set heat trigger to true. Write void on trigger enter 2D, collider 2D, other. Then if other dot gameObject dot tag elevator trigger. First, let's set heat trigger to true and the speed to 0. Next, we need to think about the turn function. We could just call it directly by its name, but then the elevator would instantly start to move to the opposite direction. We want it to stay still for a few seconds and then start moving back. This is easily solved with a function called Invoke. Invoke takes two parameters. First the name of the function and then the time after which the function will be called. Write invoke parenthesis, turn in double quotes and then 5. Now invoke will call the turn function after 5 seconds. Note that the invoke can only call functions which have no parameters and are a type of void. This is all the code we need for elevator script. Save the script and return to Unity. Before testing, add a ground platform near to the place where the elevator should stop. Wonderful! The elevator works fine. However, the player's walking animation stays on. Before we fix this issue, we could test the horizontal lift too and see if it has any problems. Duplicate the elevator system and move it to a good location. Then switch on the Is Horizontal option. Remember to adjust the triggers as well. They should be at the same height. When you're done, activate play mode. The elevator works well, but the same issue occurs. Let's fix it. When we keep player selected during play mode, we see that onCrown is not true when on an elevator. We don't need to do anything to the elevator script, but the player script needs some work instead. Locate the onCollisionStay function. Just write collider before gameObject and the problem should disappear. Save the script and test the code. Now onCrown is true as it should, and the animation is mostly okay. But when elevator goes down, it still doesn't behave properly. Also, jumping is problematic when going up and player doesn't stay on the horizontal elevator. Let's get back to player script and fix these issues. First, we will create two new variables. Write public bool on vertical lift and under it public bool on horizontal lift. After that, set them to false in start function. Where will we set this to true then? When we collide with the trigger of the elevator. So, head to onTriggerEnter and there we will create a new case for this purpose. Write case, elevator, and a colon. Now, we need to access the elevator script from here to get the information whether the elevator is vertical or horizontal. Therefore, we need to create a new variable here, which is of type elevator. Earlier, we have created variables with the type player. This is the same thing, but with elevator script. Write elevator equals to other.gameObject.getComponentElevator. Then we need an if statement. We will use the elevator's isHorizontal variable to set the correct boolean true here. Write if elevator dot is horizontal and in curly brackets on horizontal lift equals to true. Then else curly brackets on vertical lift equals to true. And finally break and semicolon. Now we know when the player is on a vertical or horizontal elevator. Next, we need the information when the player is not on the elevator anymore. We will use onTriggerExit function for this. Under the onTriggerEnter function, write void onTriggerExit2D collider2D other. Then if other dot gameObject dot tag elevator. Now we can simply set both booleans to false. Alright, next we will modify the player controls. We just need to add some extra conditions to the if statements. Let's start from the if statement that checks if the player is not moving. We will create a new if statement inside of it. Under anim.setBool, write if exclamation mark on vertical left 2 ampersands exclamation mark on horizontal left. Move the resetting of velocity inside of this if statement. Only leave anim.setBool outside of it. Then we need another if statement which specifically checks if the player is on a vertical elevator. In that case, we only want to reset the speed along x-axis. Write else if on vertical left and inside of the curly brackets, rb.velocity equals to new vector 2, 0f, y speed. Now we don't set the speed to 0 if the player is standing still on an elevator. And when he is on a vertical elevator, we only set the horizontal speed to 0. Okay, we still have one if statement to modify. Go to the if statement where we fixed the slow falling after leaving a slope. Behind onSlope, write 2 ampersands, exclamation mark, and on vertical lift. This caused the walking animation to keep on playing because onGround was constantly set to false when the elevator moves down. But now we have a condition that do this only if the player is not on an elevator. Now we are done. Save the script and activate the play mode. Awesome! Now the player behaves properly on both elevators. However, there is still some sliding on the horizontal elevator. As we are no longer setting the horizontal speed to 0, the only thing stopping the player's movement is friction. If it doesn't bother you, it can be left as it is for now. But if it does, there is a quick fix to it. Create a new physics material. Name it as elevator and change the friction to 5. Then select the elevator GFX game object from the horizontal elevator system and change the collider's physics material to the one we just created. Now the player doesn't slide as much. This is not a perfect fix, as higher friction will also slow down the player's movement when he walks on the elevator. But for now, we will go with this. Good job! Now we have working elevators. In the next episode, we will create pickups that will reward the player with points. Remember to save the scene. See you there.